Joining us this morning, Alpesh Patel, CEO of Profinium Partners. Good morning.
Good morning, Alpesh.
So, the election took place on the 17th of March, I think it was, in Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party got about 25% of the votes, which is pretty expected in a country that almost always has coalition governments, certainly in the past few decades. And this coalition government that he's formed now, it's pretty controversial.
Good and bad news with this, and you're absolutely right. In the 67-year history of Israel, they have only known coalition governments, and that's because they have a form of proportional representation and about 10 parties to negotiate amongst. The good news is they've got a government, which is hugely important, of course, because Israel is the only major democracy in that region, and it's important, certainly for Western interests, to have a stable government. The bad news is it stable? Those outside of the coalition have already been saying it's not a legitimate government, it's not stable, they've only got one seat majority, and they've cobbled together, as you say, this coalition. The worrying thing would be for the West is if they are moved further to centre-right because of the coalition, will they expand settlements? And if they do, that will damage relations which are already at a low with the US. And we saw that Benjamin Netanyahu gave a speech to the United States Congress, didn't meet the American president, quite a rebuff on both sides, actually. And Israel needs America as an ally, and America needs a democracy in the Middle East as an ally as well. So this could be worrying for the rest of the world, really, given that this is the neighborhood of Iran as well, a nuclear Iran.
Domestically, the Israelis have their own issues. In the past couple of years, there have been quite a few demonstrations. People have been on the streets because of the rising cost of basic food products, for example. Internationally, when we, I think, look at Israel, we see, do we not, Benjamin Netanyahu's entire reason for being as the security of Israel, which says something in itself about the country. I'm not saying it's wrong that the people and the prime minister should see it that way, but it's interesting to note that the whole reason for the government's being is the nation's security.
I think it's fair to say every single leader of Israel has felt that the survival of the state has been at stake in every government. And that is because in that region, actually, I don't think it's an understatement to say they are surrounded by enemies, and some of whom want the destruction of the state. Imagine living under that. And I think that's why you're absolutely right. Whilst he sees security of the state the primary importance, I think all of them, from the more left-leaning governments to the right-leaning, the downside of that is you end up spending a heck of a lot of money on defense, and that can lead to economic deficits. It can mean that there's huge investments which do not occur to uplift large sections of society because you have to spend so much on defense. And that's what's led to some of the demonstrations. And that's not something which will be particular to this government. It's going to be a problem that Israel sadly will have to live with because of the nature of politics in that region. And it does mean that the people suffer. Having said that, it is probably the richest country per capita in that region, so not suffering as much as if you look at Palestine, for instance, in terms of poverty and economic well-being.
Something else that plays a big part in the politics of that region is oil.
Yes.
And the Wall Street Journal has oil on its front page and saying that, of course, we've seen this big drop in the price of oil, which we talked about a lot here on World Business Report. Actually, it's gone up lately, the price of oil. But this talks about the fact that companies like Shell, BP and others who've suffered because of the fall in price of oil have actually managed to make gains by trading oil, something you do as well.
Absolutely.
I would imagine you've made some money too during this time, Alpesh.
Sally, I will confess, we have called oil right on my own site, investingbetter.com. We've called it right.
Here we go. I fed you the line.
We've called it right. And the reason we've called it right, and the reason why the big oil companies are making so much profit, is because it's actually been a relatively smooth decline and a relatively smooth rise. It's not been volatile, other than that it's fallen sharply, which is great for traders. It's great for companies like Shell to be able to foresee that. So whilst it's dropped 40% since its 2014 peak, which is great for us consumers, it's great for the petrol tank, be warned, it is rising up sharply, and it did a similar thing in 2009, where it had this kind of V-shaped rise up. It's not translating into good news for Shell shareholders, though, Shell and BP and the like. Shell share price is the same as it was in 2001. So if you're a shareholder, you're thinking, well, wait a minute, where are all the dividends I'm supposed to have got?
But the fundamentals haven't really changed, have they? In terms of the reason why oil was sinking significantly from June of last year, it's now going up again. So where will it go next?
Well, I think it's going to continue going upwards because, as you say, the fundamentals haven't fundamentally changed in that demand is still there, global growth is still increasing, and therefore some of the fall-offs, which were partly panic-driven because of fears of oversupply by OPEC, they haven't changed. So I think we continue being long oil, and we think that's the way to go. Actually, better long oil than oil companies.
In the International New York Times, it's always difficult to discuss a direct competitor, but Al Jazeera's troubles in the United States, let me ask you about the angle of American viewing habits of news programs, because Al Jazeera, you'll know the network, it does what we do. It looks at news in depth, and a lot of American news programs, they don't necessarily do it the way we do it. So Al Jazeera, it's not surprising, I suppose, that they can't break this market.
You're absolutely right. I think you're being generous in calling Al Jazeera a competitor to the BBC, but you're absolutely right. They aspire to be, and they're actually a quality news network. But the cliche with American news is that it tends to be insular. It tends not to be so focused on international affairs, other than a few critical exemptions to that. Well, you're right about Baby Charlotte, but I'm not sure. For instance, and I've heard this from friends in the US. They're even covering the UK general election, for instance. So I think you're absolutely right about Al Jazeera probably being in the wrong market. It makes sense for them to be there in terms of such a large market, a lucrative market, but the demand isn't there, which is unfortunate because it means that US news again remains insular, and the cliche may actually be born of a reality.
This story that they may like to cover is UAE offers hope in study of red planet. That's the headline in Gulf News. This is the Middle East heading to Mars.
Absolutely fantastic news for us in the West. Whilst we're cutting our budgets and can't afford even to have a space shuttle or send people out of space, it's great because it means that other wealthy countries are pulling their weight. But let's not forget the UAE also had this huge property slump during the credit crunch, and some might say, yes, you're a wealthy country and you don't need to spend money on anything domestically, but shoring up finances, given what had happened, given that, as you mentioned, oil earlier, they're running out of oil everywhere in the world, including their prime source of income. Maybe Mars isn't the right place to go, but great news in terms of knowledge for the rest of the world.
Now, you swamp your staff at Paraffinian Partners with emails. Are they stressed because of their inbox?
No, you know what? Forget emails in terms of reducing productivity. We need two things. We need education about how to be more productive in this new digital workplace. And second, we need to kill cell phones and instant messaging. Emails is one thing. What about instant messages going off and tweeting? I'm going to be tweeting this straight after the program.
You will.
And that's not going to boost my productivity, but profile, yes.
Alpesh, thank you very much indeed. Always
Have a good day today. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.